it's hard to know if you're making a mistake. Well, in the sense that it is hard to predict the future, it is hard to know if you're making a mistake or not. Particularly if you think, well, I've obviously made a mistake if I suffer for the consequences of doing whatever. But what if the right thing to do also results in inconvenience, expense, sacrifice? It has been said that marriage is a sacrifice, and what is it we are sacrificing if we marry? We sacrifice our sexual liberation. We sacrifice uh, being in a state of not being parents, not having to put up with the presence of a spouse and the way they might irritate and disappoint us. And obviously, we are making sacrifices in expectation of a better future. That is really the only reason why we would make a sacrifice in the hope of a better future. So the child who doesn't want to do his homework would be told by its parents that doing the homework would mean passing the exams and not being a disappointment to its parents, and perhaps having a good future through being a passer of exams. So there are a number of things that we are told are good for us, and although painful, should be endured, such as the tedium of sports practice. If you want to, if you want your team to win, um, training for your marathon, if you want to win a marathon, and that kind of thing. But of course, I'm talking about social, moral, and political sacrifices. So what makes people do these things? We can think of any number of martyrs who martyred themselves, Jewish ones, Christian ones, Muslim ones, because they thought that their martyrdom would end them up in a better place in the afterlife. We might keep stum, even though we believe ourselves to be uh, being mocked and being insulted, or we might um, be bold and respond to insults in the hope of something better. I guess it all depends on our motives when we do the thing. I mean, if we thoughtlessly said anything that came into our face because into our head because we lost our temper, then it wouldn't be, a sacrifice. Or if we were too fearful to speak anyway, then I guess it wouldn't, we wouldn't be praised or holding our tongue. Um, I suppose ultimately it depends on our actual motivation of doing the thing that is in question. So back to the question of political sacrifices. Um, we think of, well, we have to think of martyrs because, as far as atheists are concerned, uh, sacrificing their lives is really the biggest thing that they can sacrifice. So nothing can be bigger than that. Or is it possible that atheists can sacrifice their own lives for somebody else? And I think it is possible. We shouldn't think of atheists as being completely incapable of sacrificing their lives. I imagine they are soldiers who are atheists. So I suppose they might sacrifice their lives because they don't want to be thought of as cowards. And don't want to die a coward's death. What is a coward's death? One can joke that, being shot in the back is a kind of a coward's death. One was running away and was shot in the back or running away. But it isn't necessarily so. I suppose we could be doing something and the enemy soldier comes up behind us and shoots us in the back. What sacrifice does a politician make? I suppose he sacrifices the pleasure of speaking his mind so that he will survive to become leader if he didn't say the wrong thing, if he didn't annoy the wrong people. And I suppose politics is about knowing when to say something and when to shut up. But if you're a political activist, then your entire focus of activity would be to promote the principles of your particular political system. And I suppose the sacrifices being made when you're doing that would be, I suppose, the usual pleasures of what other people might do. Instead of staying up in bed, you go leafleting, or you do things that others might regard as not a pleasure, but which you have to do. And therefore, that politics is called a calling, a vocation, because you just wouldn't want to do this sort of thing if you hated it. There are better ways of earning a living than being a political activist. Callings also include being a soldier, being a nurse, being an actor, I think. The stage is a calling. So you're called to do this thing and you don't quite know why, but you just can't stop yourself from wanting to do this thing. So I guess for some people, it's not really a sacrifice, even though others might think it so. I guess there are soldiers who don't mind dying a soldier's death because soldiering is what they want to do. So I have to decide what it is I am doing. And I'm not thinking of, I'm not calling myself a political activist, but I suppose people do ask, well, it's not working because all the odds are stacked against me, and that the algorithms not getting not being platformed by the media, which is increasingly becoming more and more censorious. So what is one to do in the case of ever, well, a narrow tunnel, shall we say. So that's why we're talking about doubling down. You either there's this expression of double or quits, in that you've lost some sort of bet, and you say double or quits. So you double your stake and say, if I win this one, I don't have to pay you. Is that how it works? I know it's a gambler's expression. I'm not really much of a gambler. Double or quits. And to decide whether a toss or debt should be doubled or cancelled. What is the rule of double or quits? An agreement that a player who owes money will owe twice as much if they lose, but owe nothing if they win. There you go. So it's a bargain with your opponent. But in my case, my opponent would be all the people who can't see reason. Are they showing signs of seeing reason? I don't think so. I think they're becoming more neurotic, with a few exceptions. It is possible that the worsening of the situation will make them more rational, or it could make them more irrational and more blind to reason. So one has to wonder, well, should one have embarked on this course of action at the beginning? But then it's all about predicting the future. Some people would say, "But we'll do it if you think you're going to win." And then I guess the next question to ask is, uh, what is should the probability of winning be considered enough? And people would say, yes, of course. You don't want to do something that has no prospect of success. But I think there is a prospect of success, and the prospect of success would be, well, being platform on mainstream media after the media is given whatever clearance they need to report on a story about me. And of course, I've been told many a time that I flatter myself that secular Quranism is a world changing idea. But how can anyone deny that it is a world changing idea when it is the antithesis of the matriarchy? Of course, patriarchy is the antithesis of matriarchy because it's the converse of it, the obverse of it, the opposite of it. So, and if the matriarchy is global, then secular Quranism is well, coming up against global forces. But then there are also global forces of opposition to matriarchy. So really, there is no, okay, there is no guarantee of success, but I think the probability of success remains 50-50 in the sense that there are really only two possible outcomes. And when should failure be acknowledged? Now, does it matter? Okay, does it mean that secularism has failed if it is not implemented in my lifetime? I don't think so, because the whole point of ideas is that they survive the thinker. So all kinds of ideas survive, like, well, the biggest idea is the Abrahamic God. You might think that God doesn't really exist. I mean, not the Abrahamic God, but the concept of the Abrahamic God definitely exists. And if it was indeed Abraham who thought it up, then, uh, well, he's responsible for a lot of good about religion. Wasn't Abraham? Um, but okay, so there are people who think religion is man-made, and therefore, if you just imagine the Abrahamic God and no God can be more powerful, that is conceivable, then you kind of peaked, really, because nobody else can think of anything more powerful than the Abrahamic God. And whether or not God exists, it is a considerable achievement um, to be Abraham, who conceived of the Abrahamic God and started the Abrahamic religions. So back to the subject of doubling down. Um, I was okay. The main topic of this stream is about how ideas can take on an independent life of their own. Um, I'm basically making the point that secular Quranism uh, will still exist after I am dead and gone, assuming that secular Quranism is not implemented in my lifetime. Um, are we going to denigrate the achievements of Abraham? Uh, are we going to mock the achievement of Jesus, who succeeded in getting all those people to worship him when he wasn't even God? And we come to the question of whether, uh, if Jesus was a divine practical joke played on idolaters and blasphemers uh, by God, then what is the purpose of this practical joke? I would say it is to teach idolaters and blasphemers a lesson about being idolaters and blasphemers. And I think the the lesson is quite easily understood, isn't it? But somebody needs to teach the lesson. Obviously, this is a little idea of mine. I think the point can be made, obviously, with the help of um, the amplifying instruments of the media. And when it is, Christianity will collapse and be replaced by Islam. And obviously, people who want that to happen would should be supporting me, and I imagine that there will be some people like that in the media. So what is stopping them? Obviously, they haven't heard of secular Quranism. How shocking! I think enough Muslims have heard of secular Quranism to be talking about it to each other, and sooner or later the idea will reach the ears of the most powerful Islamic scholars and clerics. I suppose the most powerful cleric, Islamic cleric, would be the Ayatollah Khomeini. I can't think of anyone more powerful than him in Sunni terms. So the Sunnis are hopelessly divided. I can't really think of anyone with, you know, with scholarly as well as political authority. So I suppose for Muslims, the most powerful Islamic cleric, Muslim cleric, would be the Ayatollah Khomeini, who is the supreme leader of Iran, who is a Shiite. And as for the Sunnis, I just don't know who that might be. I suppose you could try to narrow it down and say, well, he's got to be an American. But even then, you really can't think of any Islamic scholar in America who distinguishes himself. You can think of political activists and perhaps the ideas of political activists, if backed up by arguments, can win the day. What happens if there are two Sunni scholars and they disagree on something? Who is going to decide which of them is correct? I suppose they could ask they could ask Khomeini, couldn't they? Or, well, I suppose they could get, all the assembled. Well, who are they going to ask? All the Sunnis, all the non-Muslims, and would their opinion have legitimacy? I'm trying to think of what Sunnis might be disagreeing with each other on, and I imagine they would be arguing with each other about who is more powerful in America, and I think this is a problem really. So the assimilated Muslims and the Muslims who are sellouts and get patted on the head and funding by their by the U.S. government feel themselves to be more powerful, and those who don't agree about selling out Islamic principles would feel that they have the protection and support of God, though he hasn't quite shown to support it, but it is only a matter of time. And if something bad should happen to them in this life, the assumption is that God will reward the correct Muslim scholars with heaven and send the sellout Muslims to the worst place. So what we are talking here is the ordering of hierarchy, this unquestionable chain of command that was mentioned a few years ago about when the point was made about how necessary it is to have a functioning political system. So currently we don't have an unquestionable chain of command, not in Europe, not in America. Nobody knows who is really in charge, except the people who are just using their wealth and connections to do what people with wealth and connections do. Make deals with each other, completely unsupervised and unchecked by the rule of law, as we know from the looting of Ukraine. But the situation reminds me of what happened in the French Revolution. So we know that Louis XVI emptied the coffers of France funding the American Revolutionary Wars because they wanted to calm the interests of the British, and they thought the British losing control over their American colonies would be a disaster for them, and that was what they wanted to do, and it was indeed considered a disaster. But then the further disaster, the disaster came boomerang back onto France by causing the regicide of Louis XVI in the French Revolution, and then obviously the fear of revolution spread in Europe. The equivalent of this can be imagined. If you can imagine France having the equivalent of the Iranian Revolution, you can imagine how much it would unsettle the other Western European countries. So if something were to happen to America this summer, a revolution, the overthrowing of the liberal order, then, well, things would change in Europe too, because Europeans unquestioningly obey what Uncle Sam says. And the orders will be different now, because, with a differently constituted Uncle Sam. What should Britain do? Well, it's obvious, to me anyway, what Britain should do. I mean, obviously, you can see in the bigger European countries, well, I can only mean Germany and France, they would be wanting to assert leadership of Europe, and currently Macron is the more telegenic, charismatic leader than Scholz, who is the German chancellor. In fact, Scholz is known for being weak and stupid. But then the Germans might decide to overthrow their liberal democracy and put somebody who's not a liberal democrat in charge of the country, and he might be somebody much smarter than Scholz. And the same in France and every other European country, really. Just kick out the established order that has served their country and their people so ill by, never governing in the national interest of the European country that they're supposed to be leader of. Hello, final call. Do I know you? So, about doubling down on mistakes or the right course of action, Well, we don't really know, I suppose. We we don't know if God exists or whether He will reward us or punish us. And we have. Okay, what I'm trying to say is, what is the safest course of action? Do we do as God commands, or do we do what we prefer to do? And what do we prefer to do? What is our long term, medium term, short term plan? Do people even think in those terms? Because obviously, going back to what I was saying earlier about doing one's homework as a child in order to pass exams, in order to please our parents, in the short and medium term and long term. Obviously, doing our homework and passing our exams is the obvious thing to do. But once we are grown up, then it becomes rather murkier what we ought to do for the best, because there will be all these different people telling us to do different things. On the one hand, we want to do A, the government tells us to do B, and um, others may want us to do something else. So, is there a way of deciding what to do for the best? This is really what this stream is about. And obviously people say if you're in a hole, stop digging. But maybe you're digging a tunnel. Maybe you're digging a grave. So it's very difficult. And that's why we really need rules and stable government. And I'm saying secular Quranism, once adopted and implemented, will give you a stabler society. But my problem is the lack of interest in so many people who ought to be taking an interest, but you just can't engage with them. They kind of agree with you one day and disagree with you and the next, and then but on the third day they've completely forgotten their conversation with you, and then uh, and then and then on the fourth day they'll just remember everything. Uh, so it's very difficult dealing with people like that, and even more difficult when most people are like that, and even worse when their ruling classes are like that too. So it it perfectly illustrates why things shouldn't be like that, and people should be made to keep their promises, keep to their word, hold consistent views, have a set of rules that they're supposed to adhere to. So even when they lie, that they're, reasonable people and honest people, um, we would have a standard of reason by which to judge them. And this is all that I propose. But nobody will pick up the idea and run with it. I suppose it's because they are mostly mentally ill, suffering from a learning disability, or just don't want to do the right thing because they are uh, morally defective people. And that's why I think we will make it easy for ourselves if we follow the no hike laws, because people can agree on them. And even the restriction on idolatry and blasphemy is useful because you can say, well, Islam or the Quran doesn't punish idolatry and blasphemy. So, and it is the best religion of Gentiles, so we'll go for that. And that's such a neat solution that people keep pretending not to understand. So, and because of that, I'm assuming that the mentally ill suffering from a character defect or a learning disability. Now, how do I deal with people who have these character defects, learning disabilities, and mental health issues? Well, I can hope for them to get cured. I can be their therapy. I can, well, persuade them to be better people. It's all, in theory, possible. So I shall continue doing that. Thank you for your attention.